Hello everybody, today I'm going to be talking about a rarely known mechanic in World of Tanks and a widely misunderstood mechanic as well. I've talked to a lot of my Super Unicum friends, not a single one who I've talked to has ever heard of this mechanic before, and I don't think I've ever heard it being discussed by anybody. It's just something that I stumbled across on the World of Tanks wiki. So basically, uh, when I was around 15 years old or so, I was a tryhard, and so I read through basically the entire mechanics section of the World of Tanks wiki, and then I stumbled across this right here under environment camo, basically bushes. It says, when you fire your gun, the camouflage bonus provided by transparent objects in a 15-meter radius around your tank, so basically bushes that are transparent. So I'm not talking about double bushing here. I'm talking about being inside of a bush and then firing, even when it's transparent. Those objects in a 15-meter radius around your tank, the camo from the bush when you fire is reduced to 30% of its original value. I don't think I've heard anyone talking about this mechanic before. So I told Paddington about this mechanic after he made his video about camo and spotting distance, which is a great video by the way, to learn about how camo works and how the spotting distance is calculated. I'll link it in the description. The math I used while making this video, by the way, is discussed in Paddington's video in detail, and I even learned something from it, which is how CVS works, Commander's Vision System. So it was a very, very useful video. If anyone's interested, you should check it out. Link in the description. But anyways, I told him about this mechanic here, and he was a little bit skeptical of it because he'd never heard of it before. And even I was a little bit skeptical of it because it was just something I had read on the wiki 8 years ago, and so maybe it had been true at one time, but it had been changed or something like that, so I wanted to test it as well. And so we ended up testing it. So let me check if this is, yeah, okay, we're good. And so we decided to test it in the training room. I'm in my EBR, Paddington's in his 50B. And basically what I did is I go 393 meters away from him in the open, completely in the open, no bushes at all. As you can see, 393. I fire, and of course I get lit. But then when I go in a bush, a standard bush, all these bushes are, and even probably most of these trees are all 50% standard bushes. Which, by the way, we did test. This is a 50% standard bush as far as we can tell. So when I'm in the bush, not double bushing, inside the bush, nothing in between me and him except this bush, which I'm inside of and is transparent, and I go to 393 meters away. When I fire, I don't get lit. And so that proves definitively that bushes do provide some camo while you're firing. And if you're wondering, maybe there was some little rounding error or something and we were just on the edge, the very edge of where I would get spotted. We tested this, he goes forward a little bit more. This time he spots me because he was a little bit too close, but then he goes to 359 meters, which is less than, I think it was 363. And this time I wait to get him lit, I fire, and I don't get lit. So that proves definitively that it does work. However, we did some further testing, and what we found is that the 30% figure here shown on the wiki is not right. It doesn't match up with what we were getting. So you see every bush in World of Tanks has a flat additive camo value of 25 for things like dead trees, and 50% for like all of these bushes here, your more standard typical bushes. So dead shrubs and dead trees 25%, all this shit 50%, which is most bushes in World of Tanks are 50%. And so, oh, by the way, this is a flat bonus, meaning that even if you're in a mouse, which has basically 0% camouflage, even with if you can find a bush that's big enough to hide your entire mouse's spotting points, then you will have 50% camo, even in a mouse, 50% total camo. And so basically, this was a 50% bush here in the replay. So according to the wiki, 0.5 times 0.3, so basically 50% times 30%, percents can be expressed as decimals. We should get a flat bonus of 15% camouflage in my EBR when I'm firing through this bush, according to the wiki. However, the actual value we were getting was closer to 10%. That's when we realized that the wiki is actually wrong. So, it's not wrong about the mechanic in general, it does exist, but it's just wrong about that number. And so we thought we had solved it at first. We thought maybe the wiki says it's 30%, but instead it's only 20% because 20% of 50% is 10%, and that's the value we recorded. But then we did some further testing with other tanks, TDs, heavy tanks, and so forth. And we realized that a lot of our values were varying a lot. And so what followed was a 6 hours session of testing with Paddington and doing math on Wolfram Alpha to decide which variable or which variables were important in determining how much camo value the bush would give you when you fired in it. At first we thought it might be the class of tank you're in, like TDs get the most, light tanks get the second most, then mediums, then heavies and SPGs or something like that. But that didn't really work out because there's some exceptions. And then we thought it might be the camo value of your tank, but then we tested an RHM Borsig with max camo loadout and then with a 0 camo loadout, and we got the same exact figure for both of them, same exact number. But finally, after controlling for many variables, a lot of testing, and getting thrown red herrings due to my terrible math skills, I came up with a bunch of wrong calculations. We finally determined that the single variable that reliably predicted camo value by the bush was in fact the caliber of your gun. So tanks with an enormous gun caliber like the T92, that's the biggest gun in the game, 240 millimeters caliber gun. The camo that you got from the bush is 3%. For one of the smallest guns in the game, we tested the AM39 Gendron, and that thing gets 15% camo from the bush, which is more in line with what the wiki said. But everything in between fits up almost perfectly. But before I talk more about this data, I want to show you one more replay. So let's get to that there. And in that replay, I'm going to be discussing how we definitively proved that gun caliber was the deciding variable. So the test that gave us our definitive answer was using the BatChat 25T. So basically what we did is, in our usual fashion, which I'll explain real quick, we tested the distance that I would get lit at in the BatChat 25T using both the 90mm gun that it has and the 105mm gun that it has. And what we found is that the 90mm gun was spotted at a further distance than the 105mm gun. And this, all the other variables are controlled for. The tank's, well, technically the tank's camo isn't controlled for, but we tested that earlier and it doesn't matter. But what really matters is we figured out that it's not just some value that's given to every single specific tank, and it's not based on the tank's classification or something as a medium tank. It's completely dependent on whether or what caliber gun you have. So if you're wondering how we actually tested all of this, I would just sit in a bush, or Patty would sit in a bush depending on the tank. The other one would go out. We would use equations or an equation to determine where we would expect to get spotted. We just assumed the bush had 10% to give us a general range of where it would be, and we would narrow it down from there to give the actual percent. I'm not going to go over the equation in this first part of the video. I might add an unlisted video at the end as to how we actually did the calculations. But if you want to know how the equation actually works, and if you want to see the equation, like I said earlier, check out Patty's video. He goes over it in that. Not sure whether I'll add that unlisted video or not. But as you can see, he comes close to spot me, and then he's just using the indicator for distance to tell exactly where you should go, roughly. And once I get unlit, then, as you can see, we're 345 meters away. And I'm just firing. And then he comes a few meters closer if I don't get spotted. Or if I do get spotted, then he goes a few meters back. And then we narrow it down to the closest meter. So our measurements are pretty accurate because we're narrowing it down to the exact meter where we get spotted. So that's how we actually tested it. But now let's go back to this table in this graph. So as you can see from this graph here, here's the bat jet with a 90mm gun. Here it gave 12% camo from a standard bush, while the 105mm gun gave around 10% camo from a standard bush, which is basically exactly the same as the EBR 105, which also has a 105mm gun. So that fits nicely. And if, in case you were doubting our methods, in case you thought that we didn't take into the camo that you get while firing into account, because you do get for example, the EBR 105 also gets 10% camo while firing, even if it's not in a bush at all. Yes, we did take that into account. So these values here, the camo from the standard bush, this is just the camo that you get from the bush alone. So if you add on your camo while firing, then this value will be higher, and that will be your total camouflage, which you'll use in the equation, which Patty goes over in his video. Now, as you can see, here's the table. Here's all the tanks we used. We went through basically all the calibers in the game. There's a few we missed, but it doesn't really matter. Here's what really matters. This graph right here. So this graph right here, I plotted the caliber of the gun against the camo that was received from a standard bush, and as you can see, it's a very strong linear correlation. Now, if you're going to take away one thing from this video, it would be that when you're in a bush and it is transparent, so not double bushing, just when it's transparent, it still gives you a decent sized bonus to camo while firing, and that bonus is smaller for guns that have a lower caliber, and it's actually larger. It's a larger camo value for tanks with low caliber guns and a smaller value for tanks with huge caliber guns. So for example, a T92, even if the bush is transparent, it barely gets any extra camouflage at all. And as you can see, and as I mentioned earlier, the camo from the standard bush varies from around 15% for the smallest guns up to, or is down as far as around 3% for the biggest guns. Now, if you want to actually use this information, what you can do is pick a tank, whatever tank you're interested in. So let's just say you're in an IS-3 and you want to know how much camo you're going to get from a bush while you're firing in it and it's transparent. We'll go to this list right here, the calibers. The IS-3 has a 122 caliber gun. So as you can see, the AMX 50B, which has a 120 caliber gun, gets 8% camo, and the IS-7, which gets 130, gets basically around the same. This is probably just a slight variation, which is why they don't fit exactly. But you can get a rough idea that your IS-3 is going to have around an 8% camo bonus from the bush while firing through it. And you can do that for any tank in the game, and you just have to look at the caliber of the gun and match up with this chart, or sorry, this table or this graph. And here's the equation for the graph. You would just plug in the caliber in millimeters in for X, and then just type it into Google, and it will give you your value. Also, one thing that I should mention is the wiki says, actually I don't know if it says this or not, but basically there's two camo values you can receive from a bush or dead tree in the game, as I mentioned before, 25% or 50%. We were curious if this camo value from a standard bush would be halved if we went inside a 25% camo dead tree or something instead, and yes, that is the case. So for example, if you have a 105 millimeter gun and you go into a dead tree, instead of getting 10% camo while firing through it while transparent, you get around 5%. So that is the case. Now, that's basically the gist of the video, so if that's all you're interested in, you can just click off now. But I'm still going to go into some more stuff at the end of this video. So first of all, the reason that this line is not perfectly linear is probably due to 3 reasons. First is human error. Even though we were very careful with our measurements, it's still possible that we could have been off by like 1 meter or so. Secondly, because in game, the distance that you see a tank at is rounded to the nearest whole number. So for example, there's no decimal points between 350 or 348 and 347, for example. It's just a whole number, so there's some variation there because the spotting distance is probably, I don't know whether it's calculated in whole numbers or not, but basically we can't use decimals. And lastly, there are some nuances about how the game calculates the distance between 2 tanks, but I'm not going to go into that. I'm asking Patty to do so in a video because he understands it better than me, but I don't know if he's going to end up doing that or not, hopefully. Another thing I should do is clear up a misconception that some of you might have about how this mechanic could be abused in battle. So you might be thinking, okay, so my EBR gets, or let's say a stirve gets 10% camo from a standard bush while firing through it. What if I just stack 8, 9, or even 10 bushes, or not bushes, trees just on top of each other in the same spot, and then I just fire and I'll have like 80% or plus, 80% plus camo while firing. You would actually only be able to get up to 90% because your bushes can only give you up to 80% camo, but that's a discussion for another day. But basically you can get extremely high camo value by knocking a bunch of trees together and sitting in it, even when they're not opaque. But that is not the case. Let me see if I can find it on the wiki. Right here, I think. So instead of the bonus from the bush with the highest, however, as soon as one tank fires its gun, the environment bonuses, so basically the bushes within the 15-meter radius, no longer stack. I'm going to turn this down a bit. So basically what that's saying is, even though there's 2 bushes here within the 15-meter radius around them, only one of them is counted. So if you knock together 10 trees, only the tree with the highest camo value will be taken into account. So you can only get a bonus from up to 1 piece of camouflage, and that's it. And in case you don't trust the wiki, because the wiki was wrong about a lot of stuff, and we just proved the wiki wrong, Patty and I tested it, and it is actually true. Only 1 bush is counted, the one with the highest camo rating. So for example, if you knocked a dead tree over into a 50% bush, since the dead tree is 25% camo and the bush has 50% camo, only the bush would be counted because it's the one with the highest camo value. So since I'm an educational channel and I like to tell people how to get better, sure, this information is nice to know about, but it's hard to actually use it in battle. So I want to give you some examples as to how this could be useful in game and when you could actually use this to your advantage. So let's say you're in an EBR and you're facing the side of a tank, let's say an S-Conk, from 400 meters away. Normally you might think that firing in the open would be risky, especially because you can't double bush. Let's say for some reason you can't double bush. But in reality, if you're able to even just sit in the bush while it's transparent, there's virtually no way that S-Conk would be able to spot you if you fire. Because of this right here, you get an added 10% bonus. And in fact, he would need around 485 meters of view range to spot you if you were 400 meters away. And I'll do the calculation real quick. So let's say 485 minus 0.2, that's 20% camo. because the EBR gets 10% camo while firing plus the 10% bonus that it gets for its caliber, which is 20% in total, times in parentheses 485 minus 50. And this will give you the spotting distance where he'll spot you. So he'll spot you from 398 meters away while you're firing through a bush. So he has to have this view range or higher in order to even have a chance of spotting you from 400 meters away. And almost all S-Conks are not going to have that much view range. In fact, it's more common to have something like 445 meters view range. And even if they have food and vents, I think it can probably get to like 475 or something, is my guess. So he has almost no chance of spotting you. You do obviously have to be careful about tanks with optics, because then it'll negate your camo far more. So don't try this against light tanks, especially non-EBRs. I wouldn't even do it against EBRs, to be honest, because they have optics. And they could also have Commander's Vision System, which does, in fact, which we tested, take off 20% of the camo value that you get when firing through the bush. So if you have a 10% camo, it'll become 8% instead of 10%. That's just how CVS works. And the thing is, in the more likely case that he has 445 meters view range, and you're in your EBR, and you have your 20% camo, he's only going to spot you if you're closer than 366 meters away, which is absolutely ridiculous. Imagine firing inside a bush that isn't double bushed from 370 meters away, knowing that you're not going to get lit. It's absolutely ridiculous. And this actually gives you, so let's do 445 minus 366. That means that you have a 79 meter window where you can spot him and he can't spot you. Oh no, I'm leaking strats. This is not good. We have to change this quick. So let's say the S-Conk is right here. You're an EBR. I'll get out the ruler. This is 370 meters away. Sorry, that's 400. There's a little tree on the edge of the cliff here. 388. He still won't spot you. And if he's 445, he would have to be somewhere around here to spot you, which is completely ridiculous. And the reason why this works so well in the EBR as opposed to something like a T92 is not only just because it has great camo from a standard bush, 10%, which actually isn't even that crazy in the grand scheme of things, because basically all tier 10 mediums have 105s. But it also gets the 10% camo while stationary, which I will show you right here. Sorry, maybe I won't. Yeah, right here. So as you can see, here's where you check your camo while firing. So here's my EBR set up without food, but I do have low noise. When I'm stationary and when I'm moving, since I'm a light tank, I get 10.13% camo even when I'm firing. So that gives me a total of 20% with the added bush camo. And by the way, that's where the thumbnail for this video came from, which kind of looks like clickbait. 20% camo while firing inside a bush in the EBR is actually what you get if it's a standard bush. So, like I said before, if you want to know your camo, match up the caliber with this table or with this graph, and you can find out how much you get from the bush. And then you add this value right here, and that will give you your total camouflage. You plug it into this equation here. So let's say you got 15% camo, so 0.15, and then you plug in the enemy's view range into this equation. So let's say they have 460 view range. They will spot you from 400 meters away. And that's how you can use this. Now, obviously, you aren't going to use a calculator in game, probably. I mean, maybe you will, but probably not, and you don't know for sure your enemy's view range, but just as a general rule of thumb, it's nice to know if you just use 460 as a value. Most enemy tanks are not going to have more than that unless they're a light tank. Alright, I think that's basically all I've got for this video. Again, check out Patty's video if you want more details on how the spotting works and the spotting distance and how it's calculated. But here's just a rough and quick equation. This 50 is always 50, never change that. You just change the enemy view range and your total camouflage rating from bushes and from um, your tank's camo well after firing, which is shown in the garage. Now this gets a little bit more complicated with Commander's vision system, but I'm not going to go into that in this video. Now, like I said, I spent like 6 hours testing this with Paddington, so huge thanks to him, obviously, and he also made the thumbnail, so huge thanks for that. Check out his video. And this also took me probably a long time to write the script, probably 4 hours or something to write the script and record it. And then I obviously have to edit it, which I haven't done yet, and upload it. So if you guys could like and subscribe if you found this video useful or helpful, or if you like my videos in general, please do so, because it would really mean a lot to me. It's what helps motivate me to make more content like this. That's about it. I'll probably leave a link to this graph and table in the description if I can figure out how to do it. Please let me know if you have any problems accessing it, because I know there's sometimes problems with that on Google Drive, but that's about it. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.